morning, everybody. Welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us on our program where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. We have a very busy day, so let's get started right now. First up, let's just talk about the Jeremiah MONELL case. This is a case that we have been live in for the past week. It's out of New Jersey. He is charged with the murder of his wife, Tara O'Shea Watson, by allegedly stabbing her to death multiple times, and prosecutors have said that he stabbed her at least 48 times. Really disturbing case. We covered it last week. It is going to be dark in that courtroom today, but it is going to be back live tomorrow. So the first part of our program today is going to be recapping all the testimony and opening statements that you may have missed, and we'll bring you up to date in the Jeremiah MONELL case. But now let's talk about what we plan to be live in today. First up, let's go to Michigan, Kalamazoo, Michigan, the Jason Dalton case. Now, this is a bit of a bizarre trial that we're going to be covering. We expect to either be live with voir dire, which is jury selection, or opening statements at around 9:30 a.m. Jason Dalton, the man you see right there, an Uber driver, or former Uber driver, is charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder in connection with a shooting spree that claimed the lives of 6 people on February 20th, 2016. Now, apparently, Dalton confessed to the crime and claimed that a demonic force popped up on his Uber app and took over his body. Now, we believe that the court ruled that many of those statements that he made to police, this confession, that those statements will be suppressed and will not be allowed to be admitted into trial. If that's the case, it'll prove very interesting what the prosecution will do. You're not going to want to miss that case again, the Jason Dalton case out of Michigan. I want to let you know that we're also planning on covering a new trial here on the network, and this is out of San Bernardino, California. Our very own Kathy Russin is there, and this is the MCSTAY family murder case. We expect opening statements today in the trial of Charles Ray Merritt. He's accused of killing the MCSTAY family and then burying their bodies in the Mojave Desert in 2010. We plan to cover this trial live. We'll let you know if anything happens, but again, we expect opening statements today. Really interesting new case that we're covering here on the network, and we previewed it a lot as well. We'll talk about it a little bit more later on. And then finally, I have to talk to you about probably one of the most high-profile legal cases happening, and we are going to cover it here on Law and Crime. Acclaimed actor Kevin Spacey is going to appear in court today for his arraignment in regards to a charge of felony indecent assault and battery in Nantucket, Massachusetts. You'll remember that he has been accused of groping a young man in a bar in 2016. Now, seeing him in that courtroom is going to be pretty interesting because other than that infamous YouTube video, which was posted about a week and a half ago, we really haven't seen a public appearance from Kevin Spacey in maybe over a year. So it's going to be pretty incredible. We're going to cover that live. And in case you don't know too much about the Kevin Spacey situation, here's a special report talking a little bit more about it.
Actor whose roles won him Academy Awards for The Usual Suspects in American Beauty and a Golden Globe for House of Cards is now an accused criminal. The case unfolded when Spacey went to a crowded Nantucket restaurant and bar where an 18-year-old busboy was at work. Court records say the busboy lied to Spacey, saying he was 23 years old. After the busboy's shift ended at midnight, Spacey bought him a beer and another. Spacey said, "Let's get drunk." Spacey or his manager bought the busboy 4 or 5 beers and 4 or 5 glasses of whiskey, according to documents. The busboy says his memory is fuzzy, but he remembers a drunken sing-along with Spacey's arm around him. Spacey commented on the length of his own penis, according to court records. Later, the two went outside for a cigarette. Spacey asked the busboy to come home with him to meet Spacey's friends. The busboy says he became nervous. They went back inside where Spacey is accused of putting his hand on the busboy's thigh, unzipping his pants, and touching him sexually. It went on for about 3 minutes. The busboy took a Snapchat video of the incident and sent it to his girlfriend, then went to the bathroom, then told a woman Spacey was trying to, quote, rape him. She advised him to leave, so he did. The busboy told police he didn't know how to react in the moment because he feared getting in trouble. The summer 2016 incident became public in the fall of 2017, when former Boston TV news anchor Unruh announced the busboy is her son. She dug into the case herself and tried to round up witnesses. Police got involved a few weeks later. When prosecutors filed the charges, Spacey released a cryptic video in the character of Frank from House of Cards, which some believe to be a response.
But you wouldn't believe the worst without evidence, would you? You wouldn't rush to judgments without facts, would you? Did you?
Spacey is charged with indecent assault and battery on a person over 14 without consent. He could face 5 years in prison and could be forced to register as a sex offender if convicted. I'm Rachel Stockman for the Law and Crime Network.
Watch that video over and over again. Great reporting, Rachel, and we're going to be covering that live. Let's talk a little bit more about it right now with my first guest of the day, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, great to see you, and Happy New Year. Welcome back to Law and Crime.
Happy New Year to you too, Jesse.
Now, I know this isn't a murder case, but you are really have covered a lot of different investigations. And I want to ask you about this one. Really interesting situation, considering the fact that Mr. Spacey, we believe, will plead not guilty today during that arraignment. What do you make of this whole situation?
Well, I think that Frank Underwood would certainly plead not guilty. It sounds like to me that had to be, I can just back up a little bit, one of the most bizarre exercises I've ever seen in the media. Just going forward, just absolutely strange. We're through the looking glass with this one. It's going to play heavily. The dynamic of the mother becoming involved in this, and that she has some status in that little part of the world there, and that was a real compelling force, I think, for this case going forward. I hate to say it, but maybe if it had been somebody else's kid, might not have gone forward like it has. But she drew attention to it, and bully for her.
Right.
Snapchat video, I think that's going to be essential here, and any other kind of video that might exist in this circumstance.
Well, Joseph, let me ask you this. So he's charged with felony indecent assault and battery. There's a question of whether or not what does that video actually show, and do you believe that it's going to be very detail oriented about where his hands may have been or may not have been, is touching the shirt, touching the leg? I mean, these are details that are going to have to be borne out, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see them, throwing the book at him if he's just simply put his arm around this kid's shoulder. However, if there is evidence of videography, from a videography standpoint, that he is running his hands down the pants of this young man, I think that that's kind of troubling.
Well, yeah, and especially, he's accused of putting his hands in that boy's pants and groping him. Pretty serious charge, and could face up to 5 years in state prison if ultimately convicted. Joseph, stand by. I want to talk about a different case that we're going to be covering as well. I mentioned it before, and it is the trial of Charles Ray Merritt. In case you don't know anything about this, here's a special report talking a little bit more about this upcoming trial. Take a look.
You're going to be left with more questions than answers. All the pieces won't neatly fit in the puzzle and give you the picture that the government just painted for you. And you'll be left with one choice only, and that is to find Jeremiah MONELL not guilty of the murder of Tara O'Shea. Thank you.
All right, that was the defense's opening statement in the Jeremiah MONELL case. Keep an open mind, jury. We've seen that kind of defense argument before. We'll have to see which way it goes. I want to bring back in Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, I had to cut you off before our last break. We were talking about the way that Tara's body was found, and you had a point that you wanted to make.
Yeah, almost consistently in every what I like to refer to as murder of innocence or intimates in these cases, you have a manifestation that's referred to as face covering, and that played out here. They talked about this blanket. You were referring to the characters that were on the blanket, and they'll grab whatever is available many times. The perpetrator, and this is many times an indication that they had an intimate relationship just with the victim. Keep in mind that if someone doesn't know anybody and it's just a random killing, I guess that they might be inclined to cover the face, but even more so in cases where there is an intimate relationship. The theory is that they can't stand to look at the person in the face because that's where so much of our identity as humans come from. So, and contrary to what many people think, folks don't necessarily close their eyes when they die, and so that adds another level of difficulty to this. If you have the dead eyes of someone staring back at you that you just absolutely rip to shreds, they will in fact cover the face, which happened in this particular case.
That's an interesting point. And again, to repeat, her body was covered with a blanket that had frozen characters on it. My gosh. Okay, let's get into that crime scene. And we saw the testimony of Sergeant John Dehart, who is from the New Jersey State Police, took the stand and explained a little bit more of the crime scene. Take a look.
What's depicted in S75?
S75 is that main entrance with the doorway open.
Okay. And what's depicted in S76?
S76, immediately you see what appears to be the body covered by the blanket.
And after that, S77?
S77 is off to the right, that L sectional that I described, brown sofa.
Can you see any of the trees you described in there?
Yes, you can.
And S76?
S76, you can see the trees, the smaller and larger tree. And if you look, you can see that table, as I described, past the door.
As you look at S79 now.
S79 is the TV, as well as the movies and game, as well as you can see the kitchen in full view now with the refrigerator, the table, and the curtain that I described earlier.
Now, each of these photographs that we just went through, did those accurately represent the living room and just beyond that, the kitchen from that vantage point that you saw when you first went into the residence to make your observations?
Yes, sir.
And I asked that, how did that?
So Detective Sergeant Crane pulled a portion of the blanket up so I could see the victim.
Can you describe what you observed at that time?
At that time, as he removed it, I saw a white female that had a cut to her neck and multiple puncture wounds that appeared to be on her torso. I also observed a small portion of blood underneath the body. You could see the laceration to her throat as well as the puncture wounds that I had mentioned on the upper torso of her body.
Does that photograph accurately represent the condition of the victim when you observed her in the presence of Sergeant Crane?
Yes, sir.
Judge, I asked that S82 be admitted as evidence at this time and published to the jury.
Objection. As the court does not continue objection. Court is previously ruled admitted into evidence. May be published.
Sergeant, after you made those observations, the room that's, if you're looking at the house, to the left, you described as the kitchen?
Sir.
With Steve. And I believe you already described your observations of that room. Did you see anything specifically of note when you made your observations?
Again, I noticed the table as well as a curtain that was hanging. I saw the refrigerator and just the other items in the kitchen itself.
Did you actually go into the kitchen?
I did not.
Were you later made aware of certain biological items that was located in the kitchen?
I was.
Okay, Joseph, we see this in every case, and analyzing the crime scene, trying to see what's out of place. Does anything look peculiar, suspicious? Does it give any clues? I'm curious your perspective, listening to this officer speaking. What have we learned about the crime scene?
Well, it's all in the eye of the beholder. I think that it's interesting. He talked about, not going into the kitchen initially. It's many times at these points where individuals will want to back out of the environment just to make sure that they get everything in order before they move forward. It doesn't necessarily seem frenzied to me in the sense that that things are just utterly destroyed. However, the biggest thing that we have to consider here is what this guy is seeing relative to the body. Not only did she have stab wounds to her chest, but there's also been an effort to cut her throat, if you will.
Right. And what did you make of just looking at Jeremiah MONELL in this courtroom, listening to the details of this brutal crime of his wife? And again, if he didn't do it, no reaction from him.
Yeah, that was kind of bizarre. How many times have you and I sat and watched something that's being portrayed before these accused, and suddenly their head goes down on the table?
Right.
He's just got this kind of vacant, void appearance to him. And again, this might go to his state of mind. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's disturbing just to watch, any which way you put it.
Yeah, really.
And the manner of death, as you said, it can seem very personal. These kinds of crimes. I'm curious the manner in which she was killed. The stab wounds were all throughout the body. This wasn't just about causing death. This was about, correct me, brutalizing the body as well.
Yeah, and causing pain. And if you just want to kill somebody, there are other effective ways to do this other than taking a sharp instrument and driving it through their body. And keep in mind, here's another little interesting tidbit. Pieces I've read have talked about that she was stabbed 50 times, where now they're saying 48 times. And let me kind of clarify that for the audience when you hear that thrown about. I've been involved in cases that have literally up to 200 stab wounds, if you can imagine. Sometimes it's very difficult to delineate between the stab wounds. Was it a wound where someone drove a knife in and then kind of worked it around in the area and it gives the appearance of maybe two? Or maybe did the perpetrator actually stab an individual and strike in the same place twice? And that does, in fact, happen. What's really compelling about these cases, many times people use weapons of opportunity. They go over to a drawer in the kitchen and they pull out a knife. Knives that we have in the kitchen are not made for this purpose. They're not military-grade knives.
Right.
It's very important that they x-ray bodies, because many times the blade will literally fracture inside of the body. And also, what were the appearance of his hands? Many, many times with sharp force injuries, the perpetrator will actually injure themselves.
Well, I'll tell you what, you mentioned those knives, you mentioned his hands. We're going to take a break. We're going to play you more testimony, but when we come back, Joseph and I are going to talk about, there's an area of controversy about perhaps his palm print was on one of the murder weapons. We'll talk more about it right after this. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the Jeremiah MONELL case right now. It's one of our live trials here on the network. We're covering a lot, but we're focusing on MONELL because it's going to be back live tomorrow. It's dark in court today. Where we last left off, we were analyzing the crime scene. Tara O'Shea Watson's body was found brutalized, covered in a blanket that actually had the characters from Frozen on it. Wow, can't make this stuff up. So we were talking a little bit more about how her body was found, the condition it was found, the crime scene. We saw the testimony of Detective Eric Crane from the New Jersey State Police. He, too, provided some interesting details about what he found. Take a look.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's a photograph that I took of one of the entrance doors to the residence.
Okay, looking at that right now, do you know what entrance door that was?
I have to look at the overall photograph, sir.
Yes, you that's 63, if you can identify the photograph, or identify which door is that.
Yes, sir. If I was looking at the front of the residence, it would be an entrance door to the left-hand side, my left, as I face the residence.
And again, is that, you actually took that photograph?
Yes, sir.
And that's an accurate representation of the condition of the door on the date that you took that photograph?
Yes, sir.
Judge, I would ask that S73 be entered as evidence.
Objections?
No.
Now, S74 was already entered as evidence. Which doorway is that?
As it would be, as if I were facing the residence, the doorway to the right, entrance doorway to the right.
And is that the doorway you entered upon going into the residence?
Yes, sir.
And what did you do once you got into the residence?
Upon opening that door to the right and attempting to enter the residence, the swing of the door, the opening of the door, was actually blocked by one of the victim's feet, a victim, a human being. And to my recollection, I did observe blood stains on the blanket as well, but it was in place over top of the body.
What did you do in regards to the blanket itself?
Removed the blanket to ensure that it was, in fact, a human being underneath the blanket, and then left it in place, I should say, where it was prior to being moved and collected later on.
The individual that you observed that was under the blanket, what, if anything, did you observe and note about that person's condition?
I observed multiple blood stains on various regions of her body and multiple lacerating stab wounds to the neck, chest area.
I'm going to show you S82, which has been entered as evidence. Do you recognize what's depicted in S82?
Yes.
And what is in S82?
That is victim Tara O'Shea.
And is that an accurate representation of the condition of Ms. O'Shea once the blanket would have been removed?
Yes, sir.
And are you the individual that actually took this photograph?
Yes, sir.
Upon completing your walk...
Okay, a lot to talk about here. Joseph, this witness was interesting because the first time we saw him was a question of not whether his testimony would even be brought in. He had provided expert testimony on fingerprint identification and analysis, and he collected prints from a bloody knife from the victim's home, and he said he also found another bloody knife behind the kitchen stove. He explained that an automated fingerprint identification system lab found 40 points of comparison to the defendant's prints, Jeremiah Monell. Now, the defense said that those results were unreliable. The judge ultimately allowed this evidence in. I'm curious your perspective on this analysis, whether it is reliable, whether this was the right decision by the judge, and does this, since it's going to be put in, does this ultimately prove the prosecution's case?
Wow, yeah. Okay, let's start with these points of identification. These come from what are referred to as minutia. These are tiny little points. Most of the time, if you're going to find a qualifying print, we'll go with the number 12, okay, for positive identification for somebody. In this particular case, they found 40, Jesse.
Yeah.
40 points of identification. So, yeah, this is a strong piece of scientific evidence. I think that there are some in the defense community that would argue, is it truly science? But right now the standard is that it is recognized science, and that it puts the knife in his hand. Interesting that it was found behind an appliance. Is that an attempt to hide it? I don't know. But nonetheless, they did their work, their work at the scene and also back at the lab and identifying this thing.
I can't help but think what you said earlier, the fact that a kitchen knife was used. It wasn't as if a killer came in with his own or her own set of instruments. It was something that was used in the home.
Right.
Seeing those kinds of weapons used, does that give you a bigger identification that it was a domestic kind of crime, a domestic violence kind of crime, as opposed to something else, a robbery?
Yeah. These are referred to as weapons of opportunity in our parlance. Whatever I can get that is within reach that my perception has a level of lethality to it. In this case, our minds, if there had been a gun, I don't know if he would have used it, but obviously he saw knives. And this is a lot of anger-driven. This is an anger-driven event, Jesse, full of passion, this sort of thing. They are estranged, as was stated. He allegedly, would have to have mounted her in some way in this asymmetrical position, driving the knife into her multiple times, this thing that he had found. And, yeah, these knives do, in fact, shear off because it's not just soft tissue that you're going through. Remember, they talked about the chest. This would have had to pass through the breastplate, intercostal spaces in the ribs, probably struck a rib or two, maybe even glanced off the sternum. So you've got these wounds all over her body. He's striking bone and soft tissue. I'd be very interested to see that they generally do x-rays in cases like this, and many times you'll find a free-floating kind of metallic body that's in there, and it's amazing how many times you find the tip of the blade inside of the body. Again, that's another big tie-back from a metallurgical standpoint.
Yeah, because as you said, those knives, kitchen knives, are not meant for killing. They're meant for being in the kitchen, and they break off. You know, what's interesting to note, and you kind of touched about it as well, is that it is alleged that MONELL physically abused O'Shea Watson for years, and that she had also taken out restraining orders against him before her death. We saw a little bit about this kind of in the James Colley case, and so many of these trials happen like this. I want to talk with Joseph more about this after our next break, because we keep seeing these kinds of cases, and unfortunately it's a really awful pattern. And again, this man is still pleading not guilty, still have a while to go in this trial, but it is something interesting to know. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have a lot to cover here on the network. We're covering our live trials that we're covering. We'll be right back. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us today. We're covering a lot of news, and I want to get started on something that is just taking the nation by storm. We're covering it here on Law and Crime. You know who I'm talking about. Let's talk about it right now. We are focusing on Kevin Spacey, because today is going to be his arraignment. That's right. He is going to be arraigned on a very serious charge of felony indecent assault and battery. Carries with it up to 5 years in prison, in state prison, if convicted. And it's alleged that he groped a young man in a Nantucket bar back in 2016. I want to break down what may happen in this case, because there's a lot to talk about with Mr. Kevin Spacey, especially in light of that YouTube video. So let's bring in right now former sex crimes prosecutor and law and crime trial analyst Dan Shore. Dan, great to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It's great to be back with you.
Okay, what can we expect from an arraignment of Kevin Spacey today?
Sure. Well, an arraignment is when you're formally presented with the charges. So he'll be brought in with his lawyer. They'll read the charges, or maybe they'll waive an official reading of it, but he'll be presented with them. There'll be usually a consideration of bail. Should bail be set? Hypothetically, he'd be remanded to jail, but I don't expect that. And then they'll set a date for the next court appearance, and maybe they'll set motion schedules and things like that.
Now, Dan, I want you to stand by. We have Joseph Scott Morgan with us. Joseph, I didn't have a chance to sign you off. If you have any final thoughts about Kevin Spacey before we sign you off today.
Yeah, again, going back to this video, I can't wait to hear what Daniel has to say about the video. I'm going to be watching because, and I'm talking about the Frank Underwood video, because I don't know how all this is going to play into it. It's super bizarre, but it was a pleasure being with you guys, and I'll see you later on this week.
Thanks so much, Joseph. We appreciate it, and we can't wait to have you back. Now, Dan, moving to you, Joseph made a good point. He's like the rest of America who saw that video. That can't help his case. Is that going to come up at any point in the arraignment today?
I doubt it. The problem is it shows a lack of seriousness. It's bizarre. It shows that he's not taking the accusation seriously. And does that really prove an element of the crime? Hard to see how it's really relevant in the case. I don't think that it'll be part of the bail consideration. There's no charges from it, but from a public perception, and look, if this goes to a jury, public perception is really important, because juries, even though they're not supposed to, they base their opinion sometimes on what they see in the media. It shows he's not taking this seriously, and there's something bizarre happening here.
You don't want a potential jury seeing that video.
Right. But does it actually corroborate one of the charges against him? No, it doesn't. But it's not helpful to him.
If he gets convicted, would that come up in his sentencing phase?
I don't think so. Again, it shows bizarre behavior by him. Does it show that he is more likely to commit a crime? Does it show that he committed a crime? Is he a bigger public safety threat because of that video? I don't see that, but certainly it doesn't help him. It makes him very unsympathetic, callous towards an alleged victim here, and maybe others.
Now, we believe, is going to plead not guilty. What does that mean, that he is going to plead not guilty for the rest of the case moving forward? Is that just what he's taking now? I mean, how does it work? He could eventually make a plea deal.
Right. Everyone pleads not guilty at arraignment. People who have mass homicides that are completely, there's no doubt they committed it, they plead not guilty at arraignment, because you haven't begun the plea process yet. There's going to be a long process where they'll look at what evidence is against them, they'll negotiate with the prosecutor, and then ultimately there could be a plea arrangement Most cases do have a plea arrangement in general. Not many cases go to trial. We covered the exciting trials here at Law and Crime, but most cases in the criminal justice system do not go to trial. So we don't know how this is going to go. They're not going to let him just walk off scot-free, especially a high-profile person like this. So they're going to want some kind of guilt as part of a plea, because sometimes you could have a plea without an admission of guilt.
Yeah.
And it's, you know.
Well, listen, we're expecting a lot with Mr. Spacey, including just seeing him, because we haven't seen him in the public in over a year. Well, besides that YouTube video, it's going to be interesting seeing him in that courtroom. As soon as we have more information, we're going to let you know.